I told her, hey, make sure that you have enough money to cover the bills. Make sure that you have enough money to finish your lease. And when the lease is up, move out. Downsize into a smaller apartment that you can afford, and let him know that he is more than welcome to join you in that new apartment when he can furbish a pay stub. Hey everybody, it's Bendy Mark and I am back with another video. But before we get started, I want to feature today's skirt of the day. If you have not had a chance, please head over to themodestfitting.com so you can be notified when I drop my first collection of dresses and skirts featuring modesty, femininity, and beauty. But without further ado, let's get started in today's video. So this is a part 2 to the video that I did probably about a week ago now. And that video was about how to love your husband by accepting him. And it just went through some of the ways in which we as wives fail to accept our husbands and then on a larger scale hinder our marriages because of it. This segment is going to be about things that you should not accept from your husband. And again, I almost forgot, this is based on a book review that I'm doing called Fascinating Womanhood, written by Helen Andelin. I think she did a really good job covering most of the instances under which a wife should reject or not accept certain behaviors from her husband. I think a good blanket statement is that in instances of abuse, addiction, adultery, abandonment, or non-support, which is when a man refuses to work, those are in general like the 5 points or so that you would reject that you would not accept that from a man. But to get into more specifics, let's see what the book has to say. She says, when he is abusive to his children, and I will add when he is abusive to his children and or his wife. I feel like this kind of goes without saying. If children or a woman is being like hurt, you have to get to safety. And I would say this would be an excellent opportunity to involve the elders of your church and law enforcement where necessary. Abuse is something that just can't be tolerated. And it should go without saying, but I think it still needs to be said, which is why she included it on her list. Later on down the page, or the next page, she points out a specific when he mistreats you. When a man is thoughtless, unfair, insulting, harsh, or critical, should you try to change him? Should you try to put a stop to this behavior? She says, no, count these flaws as human frailties present in most human beings, but do respond to his mistreatment in the right way. Don't be a doormat. Don't shrink back and act wounded or retreat behind your shell. So essentially what she's saying is, like, even if someone is doing something that's kind of inconsiderate to you, they're not really considering your needs, your desires, your feelings, you still are not in a position to control someone else. You're just not. But there is something to be said about a woman standing her ground and in so doing creating a boundary with her husband. Even if the boundary isn't immediately respected, there is value in simply setting the boundary and not just remaining silent. And so that would be an area where you could say, you're not going to change him, you can't control him, but you are going to put your foot down and make it known that there is something you do not accept. And I think that that's valuable. Number 2, she said, or not number 2, somewhere, whatever number we're on, when he does something wrong. If a man does something morally wrong, is dishonest, unjust, deceitful, cruel, or in any way sinful, don't overlook it. If you do, you show a weakness in your own character. And she adds, don't make the mistake of lowering your standards to his. So ultimately, if your husband is engaged in some sort of moral failing where it would be counted as a sin, you are to confront him with respect, but still confronting the sin nonetheless and involving the necessary parties if necessary. I think this is, depending on the scale, like if it's illegal, like you would have to go to the legal agents and figure out what you're going to do about that. If it's something that's moral, this would be a great opportunity to involve leadership in the church. I think this is part of the reason why God tells us to make sure that we don't forsake the assembling of the saints, as some are in the habit of doing. Said in modern day English, go to church and don't get in the habit of just skipping Sundays. And I think the reason for that is because at least one of the reasons is because there's protection in that. When things go awry in marriage, and they do, it helps to have an authority structure that you as a wife can appeal to. You're not doing yourself any services in the long run by sleeping in on Sundays and missing out on meeting with other saints, meeting with other Christians. There is protection in that. And so when you are around people and you build those relationships and you have those connections, that's a structure for you to appeal to in the event your husband is engaged in some sort of moral failing. The next thing on her list is the alcoholic husband. And I would extend this to be the substance abusing husband, because alcohol is probably the most popular one, but it's not the only substance problem that people can find themselves in. This is something that you should not tolerate, you should not accept, and the degree to which you will reject it will depend largely on your circumstances. And I think that this would be a good decision, again, to talk through with elders in the church, people who are in authority over you at your church. Unfortunately, alcoholism and substance addiction is something that has a crushing effect on the person and on the person's family. And so actually when the family kind of makes this unspoken decision to just kind of go along, get along to go along, or go along to get along, and they actually create an environment where they're enabling the person who is substance addicted, it actually makes the problem worse for them, and it has a more destructive effect on the family as well. And unfortunately, I come from a family of women who have suffered at the hands of alcoholic husbands, unfortunately. So much so that it became a thing that it was like passed down from generation to generation, where it was just understood, whatever you do, they used to say, whatever you do, don't marry a man who can't hold his liquor. That was just their way of saying a man who's addicted to alcohol. Because they had, in this lineage, in my lineage, had struggled so much with men who were addicted to strong drink. And so, this is something to definitely be mindful of as you're courting. The Bible doesn't prohibit alcohol consumption. It prohibits drunkenness. But I would say as a woman, you need to be very keen to pick up on if a man has any vulnerabilities to substance addiction, alcohol being among them. I have a relative of mine currently who is dating a man who she said she's never had any issues with him or anything like that, but one day he just came home drunk, and apparently he did something to her, and it was so horrible that she didn't want to share. And I remember I advised her, I said, you're an adult, and so this is your decision, so please don't take this as me taking any decision rights away from you, but you are actually in a fortunate position right now because you are not married to him. If he is showing you in courtship that he struggles with any sort of substance addiction, you are in a position to decide, is this something that you want to have to put up with and deal with for the rest of your life? If the answer is no, I would recommend that this be a deal breaker, that this kind of struggling with substances, and in this case alcohol, be a deal breaker. To my knowledge, she's still with him. And so it's super unfortunate when I see women who are in situations and things are kind of out of their hands and out of their direct control, and they're dealing with a husband who's struggling with addiction to substances, but not every time, but many times the indications are there during courtship. And it's not just with substances, it's with a lot of things. So spare yourself the heartache and the trouble. Don't see danger down the road and just keep walking down the path like nothing is there. This is such a big deal that I would consider someone who struggles with the sin of drunkenness to be a deal breaker. That man would have to, and I'm not saying that there's no redemption for someone who struggled with substance, because Jesus is able to redeem from any and all things. Amen. But I would say when assessing a man's fitness for marriage, if he at one point struggled with alcohol addiction, he would have to have several years of sobriety under his belt proven before I would say a woman should seriously consider tethering herself to that man. I've gone on a little bit long on this point, but I think it's worth talking about because it's almost painful to me to read these books and be like, yep, that's the truth, and then turn around in my real life and see women literally walking to like moths towards the flame to destruction and devastation and not take the out while they still have it. So just bear that in mind. So one of the things on our list about things you must not tolerate from your husband is other women, infidelity, adultery. She says 2 things that you have a right to expect in marriage are fidelity and financial support. Ask yourself, this is her words, not mine. Ask yourself if there's anything that you've done to push him away, to drive him away. Correct those things first. And then after you've corrected those things in yourself, confront him. And what does she say exactly? If he continues immoral practices, it is time to bring him to a showdown. State clearly but firmly that he will have to make a choice. That if he doesn't give her up, you will leave him. And be prepared to keep your word. I don't think that I could have said it any better. In the event of adultery, I think practical steps would be get your finances in order. Get your coins in order. Get all that squared away first. And then consider what you have done to contribute to the situation. Correct those things. And then lastly, confront him about the infidelity. And in that instance, you would literally have to give your husband an ultimatum and actually be prepared to follow through. Adultery, infidelity is not the time for idle threats. I think that your words should have so much power behind them that you already have a plan in place should he choose to not break off his adulterous affair. You should already have where you're going to go. You should already have your money together. You should already have all of the logistics in place before you even have that conversation with him, so that depending on how he responds, you already have a plan in place. The next thing on her list of things that you should not accept from a husband is non-support. That's just a way to say a man who refuses to work. This is distinct from a man who cannot work, either because of illness or unexpected injury or some other reason where he is rendered incapacitated. In those instances, a husband and wife link arms together and they work as a team, helping each other be strong where the other is weak. And so in a situation like that, a wife may need to temporarily take on the provider role. But that's not what this is describing. When it's talking about non-support, it's talking about a man who just refuses to work or makes excuses about why he is unemployed. She goes on to say, since you will not be inclined to let your children suffer hunger or want, you will probably seek employment outside the home or turn to charity for help. If this is the case, you should ask your husband to leave and not return until he provides an income. If you don't, if you allow him to remain, you will increase the problem. He will be removed from his responsibility, will become accustomed to your income, and you may be stuck with the job for life. Another solution is for you to move out and take your children with you. I 100% agree with this, and unfortunately, as I mentioned, I think in my Will I Ever Get Married video, I mentioned that I have a friend who is in this exact position. She married a man who was unemployed. That was her first mistake. But a year into their marriage, he's still unemployed. And I actually suggested to her the same thing. Before even reading this book, I told her, hey, make sure that you have enough money to cover the bills. Make sure that you have enough money to finish your lease. And when the lease is up, move out. Downsize into a smaller apartment that you can afford, and let him know that he is more than welcome to join you in that new apartment when he can furbish a pay stub. To this day, I don't think that she has taken my advice. I think that she is still providing for him. And I think that that's going to be their situation for the foreseeable future, because she's having a hard time establishing and reinforcing boundaries here. And in his situation, he may have some things that making it a little difficult for him to get employed, but not a year plus. At this point, he's grown, unfortunately, just as this book said, he's grown accustomed to having a work mule wife, someone who works to take care of him, and he's totally complacent to send his wife off to work each and every morning and watch her work and be stressed out and all that, and come home and do absolutely nothing about that. So non-support, don't accept that. So this part 2 was a little bit shorter than some of my other videos, but I felt like it was important to circle back. If we're going to talk about how once you get married, that's the time to really accept your husband, and more specifically, accept the choice that you made, the choice that I made. We can't blame our husbands for being who they are. We picked them. However, there is another side to that coin. There are some things that a wife should not accept because they are sinful, they are harmful, and even detrimental to the man himself. And I think that the book did a pretty good job covering all of the different circumstances under which a wife should not accept certain behaviors from her husband. But at any rate, I want to leave you guys an opportunity to leave your feedback in the comment section below. Do you feel like this list was complete? Do you feel like there are other things that needed to be addressed as things that you should not ever accept from a husband? Either way, let me know in the comment section below. As always, thank you for tuning in, and I will see you next time.